and welcome to Maritha's History Corner's 6th video. Today we'll talk about Katherine Howard and Katherine Parr. Now we'll start with Katherine Howard. The date of Katherine's birth is uncertain. Anywhere from 1521 to 1525 have been suggested. As the fifth child of a relatively impoverished younger son of the Duke of Norfolk, she was not important enough for her birth to be noted. Katherine's mother had several children from her first marriage. Katherine was one of 6, so her early childhood was filled with family. Katherine's father, Lord Edmund Howard, was the younger son of Thomas Howard, 2nd Duke of Norfolk. Katherine's mother died around 1528, and Lord Edmund had 2 further wives, but no more children. The location of Katherine's early youth is unknown. Possibly Oxenheath in Surrey, which was her mother's childhood home. It was customary for children to be put into the household of friends and relatives of higher rank. Whilst Lord Edmund had no money, he'd have prestigious relatives. Katherine joined the household of her step-grandmother, Agnes Tilney, Dowager Duchess of Norfolk, at an unknown date in the early 1530s. The Duchess was a firm believer of her other step-granddaughter, Anne Boleyn, and was often in attendance on the Queen. In theory, in her absence, Katherine should have been properly supervised and brought up to be a virtuous young woman, chaste, obedient, and ready to promote her family through a good marriage. But the Duchess did not take her duties towards the young woman in her care with the seriousness that most of her contemporaries displayed. Whilst Katherine learned to read and write, skills that made her much more educated than most women, she and the other young women in the household had much more freedom than a normal gentlewoman. The purpose of Katherine's education was to give her the skills needed to claim a position in the Queen's household prior to marriage. Music was a highly valued skill, so the Duchess arranged for her to have music lessons. Her teacher was Henry Manox, not a professional musician, but the son of a local gentleman connected with the Howards. As far as can be told from sources, the lessons started in 1536, when Katherine was anywhere from 12 to 15 years old. Before long, Manox made sexual advances towards his pupil. Katherine seemed to have rejected his attempts of seduction, but she did meet him privately on several occasions. One of the ladies in the household reprimanded Manox for his attempts to seduce his pupil. Katherine resisted anything beyond kissing and some intimate touching, pointing out to Manox that he was far below her in rank and could never hope to marry her. Other women in the Duchess' position show in their letters that they strictly monitor the welfare of their gentlewoman, whilst the record of investigation into Katherine's life show that the young women were largely unsupervised and had the habit of letting their lovers into the dormitory at night. Even by the 16th century standards, when 12 was the age of consent and 15 or 16 was a fairly usual age for marriage for girls in Katherine's strata of the society, the Duchess was negligent. It was her role to protect the young women in her care and fit them as wives and mothers in respectable wedlock, not to let them be pawed by servants. In 1537, the Duchess moved her household to Lambeth, and it was there that Katherine met Francis Durham. He was employed by Katherine's uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, and had previously had a relationship with Joan Bulmer, one of the gentlewomen in the household. Durham began a sustained attack on Katherine's virtue. Her later testimony suggests that she was very unwilling to enter into a sexual relationship with him, and that initially she might have been raped. Over time, they slept together on numerous occasions. Gifts were being exchanged between them. He gave her fashionable ornaments and she gave him shirt sleeves. They called each other husband and wife. As the law stood, consent, consummation, and the public appearance of being spouses created a valid marriage. But Katheryn maintained firmly that she had meant nothing by calling Derham husband, and she had never intended marriage. The relationship took place during autumn and early winter of 1538 and 1539, in which time Derham left England for Ireland and left £100 in Catherine's care, indication that he, at least, thought they were pre-contracted to be married, if not actually married. Manox ousted Derham and sent a letter to the Dowager Duchess and alerted her to what was going on in the household. She investigated, finding Katheryn and Derham embracing. In the presence of Joan Bulmer, gave them all a few hearty blows. After Derham's departure, there was talk about a marriage being arranged between Katheryn and a distant cousin, Thomas Culpeper, member of the King's Privy Chamber and a clear favourite of the monarch. This would have been a respectable match for Katheryn, and she and Culpeper were introduced and they took to each other. In the autumn of 1539, a new marriage was agreed between Henry VIII and Anne of Cleves. The Duke of Norfolk requested a place in the Queen's household for his three nieces, Mary Norris, Catherine Carey, and Katherine Howard. Since it was unusual for a maid of honor to serve before she reached the age of 16, and perhaps push Catherine's birth date to 1523 or before. The new queen arrived in January, and Katherine took up her duties. It was immediately apparent that Henry was attracted to Katherine, but he was married to Anne of Cleves, and the Duke of Norfolk and his stepmother may well have expected for Katherine to become Henry's mistress. The Dowager Duchess would not have seen any benefit in alerting Henry that her step-granddaughter was not a virgin. It was hardly a demand for being a king's mistress. Henry and Katherine probably slept together sometime after Easter 1540. Henry had a penchant for being married rather than having mistresses, and he married Katherine, perhaps hoping that she was pregnant, on June 28th at Oatlands in Surrey. The king was dotingly in love and fondling his wife in public, singing her praises as his rose without a thorn and showering her with gifts. Katherine, still no more than 19, perhaps as young as 16, had little experience to guide her in the situation she now found herself. Unlike her predecessor, she had very limited knowledge about court life, and the only queen she had seen was Anne of Cleves. Her short tenure and unhappy relationship with Henry had not allowed her to carve out a role as queen. As queen, Katherine was in the position to dispense patronage to friends and family, as other queens had before, as was expected of a society of networking and place hunting, were a part of the social structure. It was not surprising that Katherine, as well as appointing her sisters and half-sisters to her court, also found a place at the request of the Dowager Duchess for Francis Derham. What is surprising is that the Duchess requested it. Perhaps she thought it would be better for Katherine to have earned her erstwhile lover's gratitude. Or perhaps she did not think that the relationship had been more than a few kisses, and that having Derham around would compromise the Queen. Derham was appointed secretary. Whatever Katherine may have felt towards Derham in 1538, by 1540 she had no interest in him whatsoever, but she had become attached to Thomas Culpeper. She sent him a letter, the only known extant letter from her. In it, her affection were obvious. My heart dies to know that I cannot be always in your company. Tudor letters were more lavish with compliments and protestation of love than modern communication. But from a queen to a subject, this was strong stuff. The letter has been dated to April 1541 and tells Culpeper to come to her when Lady Rochford is in attendance. Only it asks him to procure a horse for her servant because she has trouble getting one. This does not seem consistent with Katherine being queen. In late spring 1541, Henry decided to undertake a progress of the north of England. In 1536, the rebels of the Pilgrimage of Grace had been partially bought off, with the promise of a parliament being held at York, along with the coronation for Queen Jane. Neither had occurred, and Henry now decided to visit the rebellious Northerners, and also meet his nephew, James V of Scotland. The royal couple set out in July, travelling to Gainsborough Hall, then Lincoln, before reaching York in September, then returning via Hall and Moor to Hampton Court. On November 1st, Henry ordered a Thanksgiving service to show appreciation for his wife. Doom was approaching Katherine. The servant of the Dowager Duchess, Mary Lascelles, who had warned Manox about the treatment of Katherine, had told her brother John about Katherine's past. John Lascelles, a committed Protestant, informed Archbishop Cranmer. The explanation given to Lascelles' revelations is that he wanted to strengthen the reforming party at court, rather than the conservative led by Norfolk. But that perhaps put a political perspective born of hindsight onto his actions. He was a devout man who was burnt in 1546 for heresy. He may have been appalled by the thought of a queen had not been chaste before marriage. Cranmer lost no time sharing the news with Henry, slipping a paper into the king's place at the Chapel Royal. Henry was initially disbelieving, thinking that the accusation were evil slander, with no basis in the truth. He ordered an immediate investigation with the aim of clearing his wife's name. Durham and Manox were sent to the Tower for questioning. Before long, probably under torture, Durham attempted to exculpate himself by asserting that, whilst he had sex with Katherine before her marriage, she had no interest in him afterwards, and was in fact in love with Culpeper. Henry was beside himself with rage and grief. He wanted to take a sword and run her through for the grief she had caused him. He swore that any pain she would suffer would be greater than any pleasure she might have had, and then collapsed into tears. Cranmer was sent to extract a confession out of a nearly hysterical Katherine. He told her that Henry would be merciful towards her, which calmed her down, then pushed her to admitting her relationship with Durham. It seems that he hoped to demonstrate a pre-contract, which would have allowed an annulment of her marriage to Henry. But Katherine either did not understand the implication of the legal situation, or was too honest to lie. She maintained that she never intended to marry Durham. Before long, even the hopes of a reprieve on this situation was removed, as orders came to Cranmer not to mention it again. This was probably once suspicion had fallen on Culpeper. On November 14th, Katherine was taken from Hampton Court to Sion House, a dissolved Brigittine convent. Both Katherine and Culpeper vigorously denied having committed adultery, but they could not deny that they had spent time together in secret, aided and abetted by Katherine's chief lady, Lady Rochford, whose husband, George Boleyn, had been executed for alleged incest with his sister, Queen Anne Boleyn. By act of attainder, Durham and Culpeper were convicted of treason and executed on December 10th, 1541. Durham by the full horror of hanging, drawing, and quartering, and Culpeper by the axe. Whatever the relationship with Culpeper had been, there was no evidence that Durham had laid a finger on Katheryn after she had become queen. On November 22nd, the King's Council demoted Katheryn from the rank of queen. 2 days later, she was indicated for treason. An act of attainder was passed by Parliament on January 27, 1542, despite some misgivings amongst the legislators, as there was no proof that Katheryn had committed adultery. Henry signed the act into law on February 11th, the day after Katheryn had been sent to the Tower. The following Sunday, February 12th, Katheryn was informed she would die that Monday. She called for the block to be brought to her so she could practice her last moments, perhaps not wanting to be overcome by fear in public. Next morning, Katheryn was beheaded. Her body was interred near that of her cousin Anne Boleyn in St. Peter ad Vincula. Now over to Katherine Parr. Katheryn was born in 1512 and was the daughter of Sir Thomas Parr and his wife Maud. The oldest of 3 siblings, she had an education designed to fit her for the role of wife and mistress of a household, probably with some additional of the humanist teaching, fashionable for the daughters of Henry VIII's courtiers. Katheryn's father died when she was about 5. The dominant role in her childhood was played by her mother. A strong parental interest was taken in the Parr children by their uncle, Sir William Parr of Horton, and cousin Cuthbert Tunstall, Bishop of Durham. At the age of 16, Katheryn was married to Edward Burke, son of Sir Thomas Burke of Gainsborough Hall, Lincolnshire. Lived in the house of her parents-in-law until Sir Thomas Burke gave them a home of their own at Curtin in Lindsey. The couple were of similar age, but nothing is known about their relationship, other than that they did not produce any children until Edward's death in 1533, leaving Katheryn a widow at not quite 21 years old. Katheryn's widowhood was of short duration. She probably spent a year with relatives at Cesar Castle at Westmoreland before marrying the summer of 1534. Her second husband, John Neville, 3rd Baron Latimer, was a widower of about 40 years old with 2 children. He had spent most of his life in the north, taking part in Henry VIII's various military jaunts against the Scots, visiting London to attend Parliament from time to time. Although Latimer was nearly 20 years older than Katheryn, the couple seemed to have been reasonably happy together. However, Latimer was a man of rather irresolute character, probably conservative in religious outlook, and in no way prepared for the onslaught of the Pilgrimage of Grace. Latimer was one of the nobles who the rebels forced to join the rebellion. He was no favorite of Henry VIII or Cromwell. It seemed likely that he would be punished for his part in the revolt. The Duke of Norfolk spoke up for him, however, and his life was spared. Following this, he was probably happy to move south with Katheryn for the last years of his life, dying in early 1543. Her fate sealed, and she married Henry as his 6th wife. As queen, Katheryn showed a natural skill of creating setting of elegance and display, both to please her husband and to demonstrate his wealth and power to ambassadors and foreign governments. Henry showed his trust in her by appointing her regent in 1544. Above all, she created a more harmonious atmosphere for her new stepchildren, building close relationships with all of them, despite their disparate temperaments. All was plain sailing. Her increasing dedication to the cause of religious reform made her a target of plots from the Catholic Party. She was lucky to escape arrest and potentially burning for heresy through her quick thinking and skills managing Henry. On Henry's death, although not appointed regent, she received a generous bequest and retired to her home in Chelsea, accompanied by her younger stepdaughter Elizabeth. To outward appearance, she began an appropriate period of mourning, and sometime in spring 1547 she married him. The marriage was one of genuine affection, although there were political overtones. Sadly, it was marred by Seymour's scandalous flirtation of the young Elizabeth. Katherine seemed to have overcome this, and, pregnant for the first time, moved to the delightful Sudley Castle to give birth. On August 29th, 1548, she gave birth to a daughter, Mary Seymour. In what seemed a cruel trick of fate, Queen Katherine died a week later from puerperal fever, unable to long enjoy the happiness she surely deserved. Well, that was all for now, and remember to subscribe, and the next video will be out June 15, and it will be about Anne Askew. So, stay tuned.